Welcome everyone to the CPR CSH monthly workshop. This is a workshop we've been doing. CPR and CSH have been co-organizing for well over a decade now, and we're really always very proud that we're still able to go on. But of course, it's because everyone keeps showing up to these discussions. COVID allowed us to do a lot of hybrid Zoom stuff. So some of these discussions are happening in CPR. This time, both our speakers are away, so we're having it all online. This is a special workshop because we waited a long time to have Lorraine and Ashima together speaking with us. It's two speakers together presenting their work, which they've brought together in the form of an edited volume with other people participating in it, and you'll hear more from them on that. I know you've all read the introduction, but for the sake of folks who've just jumped in, Lorraine Kennedy is a CNRS research director for the Center for South Asian and Himalayan Studies, and she's currently located in Chennai, where she's also doing her research. Ashima Sood is Associate Professor and Co-Director of the Center for Urbanism and Cultural Economics at the Anant National University in Ahmedabad. They've been friends of CPR and part of our collaborative network for a really long time, and we're really excited to have them speak to our CPR CSH group that also shows up every month to listen to these talks. As you all know, the speakers will be speaking for 45 minutes and then we'll open the floor up. So keep your questions ready. Feel free to put them in the Q&A box. Feel free to also raise your hand because we usually enable speakers to ask their questions themselves. Even though the webinar format doesn't allow for video, for the video to be on, we do like it when people participate. So either which ways, if you're here in the room and if you're willing to wait your turn, we'll love to hear from you. And with that, I'll hand over to Ashima and Lorraine and welcome you once more to the CPR CSH workshop.
Thank you very much, Mukta, for that nice introduction. I think Ashima and I are both, really pleased to be here. I mean, it's our first time speaking in the workshop, although, of course, we've followed it quite closely over the many years. So thanks very much to both Mukta and Stephanie for inviting us and for being patient for finding a date when we're both available. So let's see, I think we'll just jump right in by talking about this book. So Ashima, would you like to share your screen? Yeah, there's the cover. Right, so the book is called India's Greenfield Urban Future, The Politics of Land, Planning and Infrastructure. So this book came out of a project that goes back quite a few years. Many of you would know that there was a first sort of partial edition of this book that appeared as a special issue in the Review of Urban Affairs in the EPW. This book then was expanded and the papers were updated, revised for this volume, which just came out at the beginning of this year or late last year. So just very briefly, the book's aim was to try and bring together in a single volume some of the what we found to be very exciting, diverse urban research that was being carried out across the country, and also to sort of maybe fill a gap that we noticed and others noticed for a kind of a textbook, a very much research-based textbook, as the study of urban and urban management, all kinds of urban related sort of training programs started to show up. And so hopefully this will prove to be a useful collection for that purpose. Now, what these different contributions have in common is a focus on the urban frontier, the sort of the spatial extension of urbanization. This is opposed to, say, inner city or core city redevelopment sites or what are called brownfield sites. However, as these contributions make clear, greenfield urbanization takes diverse forms and responds to different imperatives. These spaces include those on the what are called often peri-urban edges of metropolitan regions. Sometimes they are spaces quite far from metropolitan or other cities, like the case of the Andal airport project that Gopa Samanta studied, and also the case of large-scale corridor projects between cities, like the Gargantuan Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, analyzed by Shreya Anand and Neha Sami in this volume, which the government sees as a means to enable the ongoing urban transition. And at the same time, to meet objectives for industrial development. We argue mainly in our introduction that Greenfield urban development can be seen as an enduring idiom of politics in India, with state initiatives from pre-colonial times up to present of city building. Examples like Jaipur or Chandigarh come to mind. And we observe that the more recent renewed interest in city building, such as Gurgaon or Cyberabad, is accompanied by an increasing tendency to instrumentalize the urban in pursuit of economic growth and a competitive drive to attract global financial flows. New city projects like the first version of the 100 smart cities, which the CPR is following very closely, purport to offer planned solutions to rapid urban growth and to the presumed demands of the global economy. So Greenfield urbanization takes diverse forms, involves various actors, and has repercussions for the politics of urban development. And in our introduction, we discuss some of the literatures, the recent literatures, such as speculative urbanism or theorizations of rescaling and bypass. The chapters in the volume engage directly also with struggles over land that animate many debates in the urban studies literature. They question the politics underlying these projects, including labor market issues, who gains, who loses from projects promoting IT. And that was analyzed in this book by Vijaya Bhaskar and Suresh Babu. But they also look beyond some of these immediate concerns to question urban futures that they foreshadow. The book has three main sections. After the introduction, there's the imperatives, corridors and infrastructures. The second one is dynamics, land and real estate. And the third one, which we've called aftermath. So it's the, looking at the impacts and the repercussions, both political, economic, and social. And I'll let you, just see the titles and the authors who I think we have with us today, some of the authors. So that will be an opportunity maybe in the Q&A if people are interested in sort of engaging with some specific chapters. Ashima, would you like to come in at this juncture?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lorraine. What I would like to do here is, first of all, good afternoon to everyone who's here. And thank you so much to Dr. Stephanie Tavalama Vival and, of course, Dr. Mukta Nayak for inviting us to present here in this series. And as Dr. Lorraine Kennedy, their friend and colleague, points out, this volume represents many, many years of work and thinking around what exactly is the urban greenfield. And this is a term that we use with a lot of care because, we are very cognizant that there are ironies in, with the rich history of habitation that we have here in the South Asian subcontinent. And so what I would like to do is to maybe elaborate a little bit on some of the themes that Dr. Kennedy has highlighted in the case studies in our volume. And Professor Kennedy will, of course, also speak more to, particularly the peri-urban frontier. But I want to just flag some ideas that have directed both our joint as well as our individual inquiries over the last few years, looking at, this whole vast frontier. So first of all, let me just highlight that, we've underscored this and Professor Kennedy has pointed this out, but the comparative approach is really central to the aims of this volume. And what that allows us to do is to glean the continuities and the departures across both time as well as space. So on the one hand, we see that there is a conflation of city making with the creation of this high quality master planning for infrastructure. For example, in the smart city scheme of which Dr. Kennedy just spoke, and that is very much of a piece with this post-colonial focus on master planning as the precursor. And Ravi Kalia, of course, reminds us that, in the post-independence policy goal of having 300 new cities before the turn of the last millennium, right? And so this is very much a continuation, but at the same time, the 21st century agenda, I think where it is new is that it represents the focus of the energies towards the private sector. And the policy architecture that we see post 2000 has really assigned to the public-private partnership as well as private enterprise a really starring role. So there are two implications here that we do highlight through the case studies. I think our authors are very much, I'm so glad to see some of them here, have highlighted. One is that, this sort of post-colonial policy concern about the balanced urban industrial growth, which meant planting new towns, especially the steel towns, for example, of which I will be speaking in remote areas, that is now replaced with a more pragmatic and maybe a sort of financial return driven leveraging of peri-metropolitan real estate. And as the case studies on highway urbanization and corridor urbanization show us, as well as the AeroCity projects, that the role and their air transit infrastructure development really is very central to this new urban greenfield in a way that is somewhat different from the post-colonial towns of Rourkela or Bhilai, Kolkata. This is also another connection that I think we do draw in our introduction and across the case studies is with the new forms of private policies. Gavin Shatkins talks about them in across East and Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and of course Africa more and more. These have been, of course, addressed by the work of Sierra Moser, among others. Ayunadatta, Abdul Shaban have a very important volume looking at sort of this comparative framework across many different kinds of national settings. And a lot of the attention has been on the privatization of planning and land transformation. And one of the questions that we ask in the aftermath section is really to say, how do these sites develop over the long term? And particularly with respect to areas of urban governance, social spatial relations, and the economic linkages that they make possible. These are questions that are actually methodologically hard to get at. And that's something that I will be returning towards the end of today's talk. And I must say also that theoretically, our framing of the urban greenfield does stand in opposition to, ideas, for example, of, the occupancy and to subaltern urbanization. And a lot of our energy and in the case studies in sort of making those connections, right, and seeing where a lot of these kinds of frameworks fit together. Our case studies illuminate city-making projects, some of which evolve into state cities, but then there are many others, as you will see in the volume, that actually fail to take up. So what happens in the case of failures? What causes that failure? And of course, we'll return to some of the methodological questions towards the end of the talk, but I will hand it over now to Dr. Kennedy. Really looking forward to her presentation of her work from Chennai. And I'm stopping my share now.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. It should just take a moment. Okay. All right. So the idea in this next section is just to sort of present the ways in which we've sort of tried to take forward this project. And I mean, this large program, I should say, it doesn't correspond to a single project, but it's a reflection that we share, which in my own case focuses more on metropolitan peripheries, which in a lot of the literature, as many of you would know, a lot of the urban studies literature is a central sort of topic of debate, and engaging with those debates has really, I think, stimulated my research in the last years. And some of this is joint work that Ashima and I have done together, which was to sort of focus on the policy instruments and the rationales behind the policy instruments, and then of course their sort of implications for governance, but their implications also socially and spatially. And this is these are some of the published work that we completed sort of simultaneously with the work on the book. Now let's see, I'm having a hard time moving ahead. Yeah, there we go. And then subsequently, I was involved in some joint work, and I've acknowledged some of my co-authors here, sort of trying to take seriously this call for new geographies of urban theory, and trying to compare different cases and learn through comparison, with a nod to the really very stimulating work that Jennifer Robinson and others have done in recent years on comparative urbanism. The aim was to try and also to develop a conceptual framework for the analysis of peri-urban dynamics in relation to the sorts of morphologies, the spatial expressions of these urban transformations, and to focus on the drivers, and we did this. I mean, this would be much too long to develop in any kind of detail here, but our approach was to develop these analytical lenses that have meaning both in a spatial sense as well as a social sense, and then we basically across these very diverse cases, we were comparing a case in Ghana. It's a peripheral area outside Accra called Kasoa. In Shanghai, we were looking at the case of Lingang, and in India, Alex Coleman's work on Faridabad near Delhi were the cases that we were trying to sort of systematically compare and explore, and one of the sort of outcomes of that research was to identify 3 key processes across cases. These are market and speculation driven property development processes. These in all 3 cases tend to favor upper and middle class sort of residential spaces, and also they are produced in each case, however, by sort of very distinct, historically grounded land politics. And those have very different, distributional implications. And secondly, in all the cases, state-led development strategies were seen to be, very significant sort of drivers of both sort of socio-spatial fragmentation as well as integration, and likewise diverging degrees of connectivity and bypass. Again, those were the sort of analytical lenses we were using, and interestingly, these state-led strategies exist side by side and also induce more incremental bottom-up subaltern actions. which are very emblematic of peripheral urbanization. And then lastly, you know, fragmented planning and development practices, which are rooted in, you know, complex governance arrangements. And one of the things that we found is that there was a correlation you can observe between, you know, institutional fragmentation and spatial fragmentation on the ground. And yet this comparative work, you know, showed very, you know, emphatically that although we see rapid sort of peripheral urban transformations across the global South, that these spaces do not, you know, demonstrate uniform morphologies. And this research has led directly to the current project that I'm involved in at the French Institute of Pondicherry. It's called Urbanizing Chennai. And this is with G. Venkatasubramaniam and a host of partners, both local and further afield. I've listed them here. And, you know, we're also in dialogue with a number of other academic and non-academic partners here in Chennai. This is ongoing research, so I'm just going to, the idea is just really to, you know, present this and to continue to think about this in terms of, you know, some of these Greenfield related problematics that we've been talking about. So in this particular case, we're trying to pursue this idea of a socio-spatial approach, and let's see, I want to be mindful of the time. So we're doing this also using comparative methods, but this time we're doing intra-urban sort of research, because we've identified that in the peripheries, and this would be the case of many or all large cities, you have very different dynamics going on in different spaces, and you know, so you can sort of within a given sort of political and institutional space, you can identify and analyze different cases. So one case that we chose is a sort of a revisit. It's the IT corridor, and many of us were involved in a big project. It was an EU funded project on urban, you know, paths to sustainability across many continents and many study cases, and Chennai was one. And at that time, we had selected the IT corridor, which was coming up as being a very mixed space, and you can kind of, you know, it's hard to see from on the presentation, but you know, there are these very sort of planned state-led industrial IT parks in blue, and then you have very large-scale resettlement colonies, Kanaginagar, Cemetery. Actually, the spatial footprint of Cemetery has probably multiplied by about 4 in the interim. And then we chose a second site, which we selected using spatial analyses, and so sort of not a site that we're familiar with and that we maybe would not have actually even noticed as being particularly interesting, and we're just starting to explore that second site. But this image is also along the IT corridor. What you can see here, the Buckingham Canal, and then our corridor, which I'm afraid is not very visible, is right here. This is this large-scale expressway, and that has been, you know, an incredible sort of stimulus to a lot of, you know, property development, but also other sorts of you know, institutional changes, has really put in place a number of changes. So what we're doing is we're trying to study, you know, what we call this co-production of space in these areas. And one really intriguing thing is to just see the incredible diversity. So we're taking, these areas are outside the Chennai Corporation. They're they belong to, rural administration, they're panchayats, and we see a tremendous, diversity in the sorts of changes that have taken place in the last 30 years. So we're doing, spatial analyses, and then we're doing, work in the field where we're trying to really sort of question, what we call modes of engagement. So the idea being that we want to try to really place ourselves at the vantage point of the panchayats and study their sort of engagement with these urbanization, processes. And so we're doing that by systematically comparing local finances, but also ways that civic amenities are managed and governance practices. And, our idea is to try to move beyond just this idea that these spaces are impacted by urbanization and to try to, see what is the ways that these, panchayats, but also other local stakeholders can engage with what's going on. And this involves also sort of trying to understand the sort of intangible ways that these processes change sort of life on the urban frontier. So I don't really have time to go into details, so I'll just kind of very quickly move through here. You would be familiar, I think most of you here, that these rural panchayats are nested within a hierarchy of an administrative hierarchy. They have very limited mandates. They have limited finances, but they have a high level of discretionary powers. And as some of these panchayats, are reaping sort of very concrete gains from the establishment of, say, an IT park. I'm thinking of one where there are, there's really been a lot of employment created, and this has led to a windfall of professional tax for some of these panchayats, and also gated communities coming in translates into higher property taxes. And on the other hand, you have panchayats that have not directly benefited from, or have been inconvenienced, however you want to look at it, have been transformed by what's happening. And it's just interesting to sort of try to map all the various ways that they they tap into different kinds of funds. I'm just going to flash up here very quickly. Our villages here are all contiguous villages. Some are just on the IT corridor, others are a little bit inside. But there's a tremendous variation in the sources of their revenues. And this is something that we're trying to kind of dig deep into as a way to sort of question some of the different priorities that these villages might have. One very interesting thing is that local politics remains a very local domain, and that the elected representatives almost without exception are what we might call legacy residents, that their families have been established here since before these rapid changes started taking place. That's also, I think, an interesting sort of avenue that we'd like to further study. And this qualitative research goes back and forth with the what I'm calling the geoscience-based research. And maybe we'll be invited back to talk about this research. I hope so. It's really very rich. So I'm going to stop so I don't run over into Ashima's time. Let me just stop sharing here. Yeah, I think that worked. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lorraine. So Very interesting to learn about Chennai. And what I have here is, I promised to talk a little bit about the methodological challenges because this is really what we ran into, trying to understand the long durée of the urban greenfield, particularly in these sites in Jharkhand. And what you have is a photograph of a frontier of a frontier. It's a township within a township. So let me say a little bit more about that. In what I'm is going to follow, I'm presenting two cases of specialized and really privatized urban governance, which we have argued in some of the work actually that Dr. Kennedy spoke about in the context of Hyderabad. It allows for all forms of elite informality and processes of neo-illiberalization. And in each of these cases, I'm asking how can we trace back the kind of concrete spatial forms that we see on the ground to the decision making that is happening within them. And so it's sort of problematizing really how we know what we know. So it's really sort of an epistemological kind of entry into the sets of questions here. So like I said, the photograph here is a frontier of a frontier. This is a township that has been private township built on the peripheries of a steel township in the state of Jharkhand. But the land transactions that allowed its construction really remain quite obscure. And what I'm going to argue is that the institutional fragmentation around the steel towns makes possible forms of informational fragmentation. And these then foster all kinds of information politics. And I'll come back to this term because, it's been very widely used in different kinds of contexts, which conceal and also unsee in the official records the built form that you see on the ground, right? And this is very much in the spirit of what Ananya Roy has described as this kind of dynamic unmapping of, informality as an idiom of planning, right? So let me explain what I mean here and tell you also what I plan to speak about. So in a way, we are going back to the future of, the urban greenfield and trying to learn from India's steel towns. And I have two case studies here. And my arguments, I'm just putting them up here, are that institutional fragmentation then fosters kinds of informational fragmentation. And the specialized forms of governance generate informational politics that serve to obscure as much as they document, right? And here, constructivist knowledge claims can be useful in uncovering undocumented history. The focus here is very much the methodology, and these are my case studies here. You all know the state of Jharkhand. These two, I've pseudonymized the names of these two steel towns, both built in the 20th century. And the eastern state of Jharkhand, of course, saw a variety of company towns that came up to accommodate the workforce of large-scale steel production plants, right? And one of these that I'll talk about first is Steel Nagar. It has a population of about 4 lakh or more, 400,000 or more, does not have a municipal corporation. And this is in direct contravention of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. And I will not go into the details of how this state of affairs came to be, but really trace what it means for researchers as we try to uncover some of the processes and some of the built form on the ground. So I start here with the idea of information politics, and this comes from joint work again with Dr. Kennedy as well as Ram Mohan Chitta and Devdatta Chakrabarti. And we spoke about information politics as the ways in which informational resources as well as the risks and rewards that are associated with them are distributed across individual actors and identity groups. I must say that this term has been deployed in a variety of contexts. There's work of Davenport looking at transnational politics. There's work in India by Rajesh Veeraraghavan, and it's sort of, in the title of the book. Janaki Srinivasan has spoken about information politics in, other contexts, but this is the kind of definition that we are going with. And, here you have the public information office in Steel Nagar. And what we see here is how shared access, really requires crossing all of these formidable series of physical hurdles, starting with the waiting room, where you even to enter you need prior approval from an officer inside. And even though Steel Nugget plant is subject to RTI, it has been involved in a series of contested land deals, which I will speak about. And locals say that officers that have improperly transferred land, and let me just say a little bit more about that. And acquired that was land that was acquired nearly 50 years ago from mostly Adivasi, but also many backward communities through an exercise of eminent domain land acquisition. And that land has now been transferred to a mall, as well as the high-end sort of gated township that I showed you at the beginning of this of my slide deck. And how were these land transfers exactly achieved? And even though the public information officers may personally be wishing to share with you, they are very circumspect because this is information that is of course carries risks as well as rewards, right? There is another very important set of actors whose very existence in a way proves difficult to actually uncover in the official record, and these are the bastis, right? And these are photographs from Steel Nagar and very much from the heart of the city, as well as places that are a little bit on the outskirts, but not really far from the center of the city in any way, right? And these bastis or encroachments can be argued to represent the porous outer boundaries of Steel Nagar, right? And unseeing appears as an important boundary strategy, right? And Steel Nagar did not report the presence of any notified or notified slums in the 2011 census. In some ways, this is typical of Jharkhand cities. But what is very interesting is that these uncounted encroachments are very prominent close to the southwestern peripheries of the plant on railway land. One of the things that we heard from the human resources officer at the steel plant was that these encroachments house the casual service workers that could not be accommodated in the planned residential sector. Now, all of these is coming from interviews. And these areas remain without even the most basics of services. And what you have here in one of these photographs is, an Anganwadi, which is one of the few symbols of state presence in this site. So I will, in the interest of time, not go into too much of the details, but in a way, emphasize that there is a huge gap between what exists in the official record and what is in fact visible on the ground. And that is really the tension that I want to explore here in this presentation. Moving on from Steel Nagar, I want to talk about another steel town that I call Vishnu Nagar. And you see here this informal market, of course, this Jharkhand is a state that was carved out as an assertion of Adivasi identity. And Vishnu Nagar is in a way, sort of the original prototype which has inspired Steel Nagar. And there are a lot of differences between the two cities. But what's very interesting is that they have been through similar processes of transformation, both industrial and urban, through the post-liberalization period, with the decontrol of steel prices, post-liberalization. Nagar Steel reduced workforce from by over a half, right, to just under 40,000 employees, according to information available in the published literature. And this contraction of the regular workers also reduced Vishnunagar's Steel's obligations to provide housing to these contract workers. And the subsidiaries in Vishnunagar support a very diversified and growing economy. Yet, despite having a population far greater than the statutory limit, Vishnunagar also remains outside the rubric of municipal government. Instead, certain key areas are provisioned by a subsidiary of the steel corporation, which serves as a de facto government in the command areas. Other areas have seen fast mushrooming informal growth that remain outside this mandate and are administered by a state government body. And what was particularly speaks to sort of the informational fragmentation that I'm describing here is that our attempts at ascertaining the precise boundaries of these two areas was met with a lot of resistance, right? And of course, junior officers perceive a risk in sharing information that may reflect, in various ways on the reality on the ground. Now, example of this is this informal settlement, which is, by various counts, either according to the Census of India, about, in numbers in the tens of thousands, 50,000 or more, and according to unofficial accounts, is as many as, lakhs of people. And, the story of this settlement, which I'm calling Munda Nagar, really came about, in a way that was really, predicated on, the struggles of communities, sort of the agrarian communities in this area to lay claim on the land, right? And this the kind of documented history does not really exist. But what was recounted to me came from oral histories, right? From some of the activists that were involved in these struggles. And the work that we are doing here, that I'm very interested in doing, is takes very seriously these discrepancies and disjunctions between the various spatial records of ostensibly what is the same territory, right? And yet this kind of triangulation really breaks down where the official record is in many ways silent about what is happening on the ground, right? And this is where I would argue that constructivist knowledge claims allow for the accretion and divergence of multiple sources. So with that, I'm coming to my very last slide. And just to say here that, just as we speak of institutional fragmentation, at the other side is this kind of informational fragmentation. And the information politics is particularly important and needs attention when we look at the rise of contractual forms of public sector employment. And constructivist knowledge claims make visible urban politics that may otherwise remain invisible. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand it over perhaps to Mukta.
I'm telling you this. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was switching back and forth between things. So that was great.
Sure,
Thank you so much for... I also wants to say something to me at this point. Do we have questions? Otherwise, I have a couple to start us off with. But everyone, I'll repeat again that you can either post your questions on the Q&A, or you can raise your hand through the raise your hand button, and we can call you into the conversation. That's how we're going to do it. So while you think up of the questions, I was, it's really fascinating talking such different sites, to speak from, that I'm also like trying to move from Chennai to Jharkhand and back in my own head. But I actually was very intrigued by the whole legacy residence thing that Lorraine, you brought up. That, I mean, some of my work is on Gurgaon and I also live here. And this is also something that we see here, that, 2 elections and 3rd local election in, we are not really seeing any non-legacy candidates even stand for elections. And if they do stand, it's quite kind of a foregone conclusion that they are not going to get any traction at all. And while initially and I'm not talking about academic discourse, but really the discourse among the civil society in the city Initially, it was about lack of voter participation, meaning that it's only the residents from the urban villages, etc., who vote, whereas the educated elite who moved into Gurgaon don't really vote. That was the initial discourse. But even though the voting percentage of everyone has gone up, this hasn't changed, which sort of and you know that has something to do with the way the municipal corporation operates and the kind of linkages you need to perhaps even survive in your 5 years as councillor. It's not just about getting elected, but what you would do after that and what influence you may or may not have. A couple of candidates from non-legacy candidates who have managed to get in and tried to change things around have been silenced and have experienced fairly violent retribution. So I just wanted to contribute that to the conversation from a site that is a little bit further in this journey, but definitely sort of experienced similar processes as, I think where the villages you're studying are sort of in the initial stages of that transition from rural to urban in a governance setting. So I was just intrigued by whether it's about lack of engagement of the newcomers in, or whether it's something else that sort of dictates the politics in these emerging sites.
Thank you for sharing that, Mukta. That's really interesting. I thought that I should actually do some research on, voter participation in these areas. The problem is that, because we don't have any data on population since, any recent data on population. I mean, there are estimates, but, some of these villages have, many have doubled in their population. So that's very rapid. I do suspect that there is, probably newcomers are maybe not registered to vote there. But I think it's more than that. I think it's seen as a domain, in French we'd say a chasse gardée, like it should be reserved for, local people. And also, perhaps the whole getting things done, people want their elected representatives to know how to get things done. And can you trust a newcomer to know? And so no, I think those are really interesting questions. In my particular case, these villages have been informed that they are the last, this is the end of the road for the panchayats. They're going to be annexed into either Chennai Corporation or Tamarind Corporation. And they feel that very, very strongly. They say things like, I am the last president of this place, and they don't feel that and I think rightfully so, they know that as a ward of a corporation, they're going to be clubbed together with other villages. It'll be much harder to, keep their influence. Anyway, thank you for sharing that, Mukta.
You're welcome. Questions, folks? Okay, Rakesh has raised his hand. Let me just call him in. Hi, Rakesh. You can unmute yourself and speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Very important discussion. And I'm based in Patna, and I'm at the Center of Social Geography at ANCNA Institute of Social Studies. Here, we are also looking for the same or similar phenomena and studying socio-spatial transitions in urban peripheries. Students doing writing thesis on Patna, and myself engaged in smaller towns. So I would like to draw attention to what this phenomena is not, in fact, as must be knowing also that confined to metros and cities, towns like IT towns. Even the district headquarters are in fact undergoing similar change. But there are spatial patterns, particularly I would say from Eastern India, where the institutions like town country planning organizations don't exist particularly in Bihar for long multiple decades. So it's happening by default how the urban peripheries are transforming, and many times the triggering factor are those the road as well as some industrial, not industrial projects, but say some infrastructure projects that are emerging in. That's the part of governance reforms and upgradation of infrastructure. But the rural at the periphery is transforming by default. But many times the urban institutions are not in fact robust enough to guide these changes, or in fact lead these changes. They are happening on their own. But government is also trying to in fact negotiate a better deal for themselves also. So the land rates, the land revenue rates have been increased automatically, even areas where still the agriculture is being practiced. But community, if we have seen the gauge from the vantage point from the rural also, we can see that they have been also anticipating or waiting for this transformation to happen for long, and like the areas have been awakened from slumber, and they are looking forward opportunity to in fact join the urban with great haste. Many of the people from smaller farming communities, small farmers, are losing their land, but there are somehow just because the rural hinterland is weak in terms of the opportunities, they are eager to join the possible urban life, and they are willing to, in fact, willing to lose their land also for this purpose. So these are my experiences of studying land acquisitions in urban periphery. This I wanted to share, that this phenomena has percolated to district headquarters, even block headquarters of different parts of Bihar, at least I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rakesh. Why don't you respond, and then let's see. I'm sure there'll be more questions by the time you do.
Ashima, I don't know if you'd like to come in on the Eastern India thing. I mean, I thought that was really interesting, and thank you, Rakesh, for sharing that. Just some things that I agree with you that I do think that already at least in these villages in Chennai, people have anticipated, either by, selling their land, upwards to 20 years ago. Sometimes they have regrets about having done that. But in any case, you see very much on the labor market front that people have, looked for employment and consider that there's more opportunity than there was previously. It's very interesting, though, when you ask people the question of whether they, I mean, this is an administrative change, but whether they are anticipating, I mean, whether they're happy to join the corporation or whether they want to remain being a panchayat. And it's you get really diverse answers. People say, yes, because then it will solve some of our problems, like garbage. We'll have a place, finally we'll be able to take our garbage to this dump, which is at first that really, was a little surprising to me, that how front and center the whole issue of garbage is. But of course it is a big, huge problem, and it's expensive. And if you don't have a place to dump it and you have to carry it, or transport it for 40 kilometers, that costs a lot of money. For a panchayat that doesn't have much money. But many people said they were unhappy about it and did not want that to happen, that they liked to be able to just walk to the panchayat office and pay their house tax, and they like being able to tell the president, I have this pothole in front of my house and I want you to fix it. And this I think is very revealing about the ambivalence that many people feel, and anyway, I'll let Ashima come in. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, I think that's sort of a fascinating set of transformations that is happening, I think, across the country. And I think there's also been a lot of really interesting writing, and Lorraine, both of us could probably speak to a little bit to that. There's of course, the sort of the whole notion of agrarian urbanization, but also, Sai Balakrishnan has written about, this kind of jurisdictional arbitrage, right? The cost versus benefits of becoming urban. And, elsewhere, there is a huge politics around that. And of course, I think Gopa Samanta, I don't know, she's one of the contributors to our volume. She's written about that, and particularly in the context of West Bengal, because there's always, there are a lot of advantages to remaining rural. You have access to funds of the kind that are not available in urban areas. And, in the context of Hyderabad, there's been a lot of tussling about being part of the Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation. So I think it's really fascinating to see how, as Dr. Kennedy pointed out earlier, how these processes play out in different parts of the country. Certainly, I can speak to Jharkhand, and I can tell you that in the peripheries of Vishnu Nagar, for example, the local panchayats tend to be very resistant to the idea of being incorporated into some kind of larger sort of urban, whole, some kind of, behemoth or some kind of big monstrosity, urban monstrosity. So there's a lot of resistance, but there is, I think, really, the idea of Sai Balakrishnan's idea of jurisdictional arbitrage really holds that, these are always the costs and benefits that probably have to be balanced, and they are being, calculated in different ways. In different parts of the country, different in Chennai or West Bengal or in Jharkhand or Bihar.
Thank you. So we have Abhinav and then Smita, and both of you can ask. Maybe we can take both the questions together before we ask Lorraine and Ashma to respond, and any others that may come up. Rakesh, did you have a follow-up?
That's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Go ahead, Abhinav. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, you're on.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So yeah, thanks for the wonderful presentation. So in states like Jharkhand particularly, the urban frontier is often shared with boundary with forests and other fragile ecosystem. So how do these local actors and state is managing these forests and the complexity that these ecosystems come with when they're urbanizing, especially in areas like, let's say, Ranchi or Dhanbad or Jharkhand, where the frontier is common with the forests and other such ecosystems, especially mining and all of that. How does all of that plays out in greenfield urbanization? Yeah, thanks.
Smita?
Yeah. You're able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Yeah. So both of you, Professor Loren and Dr. Ashima, both of you congratulations. Like this is a very good, the work. Both of you are working on the industrial corridors, especially like the IT sector corridor in Chennai, and this corridor development that's happening in Jharkhand. But I have the few observations. The first one to Professor Lorraine regarding like you are looking at a lot of things. One is the governance issues, governance institutions, and you are looking at urban finance, and then you are looking at the legacy issues of the families, whether they are interested to be the part of the urbanization or something like that. So what exactly is your key the research questions? So what I would suggest is to bring all those findings, to bring your the arguments, particularly under the key issues or the key the research issues or the research questions which you are trying to the pose and then address. That's the first thing. And the second thing, Ashima, this is also a very interesting the study. But as you were presenting, there was a kind of the confusion that was happening in understanding what exactly you are trying to what are the key issues, or what are the key elements, the factors which you are trying to unravel or trying to understand. So first you say it's about the informational politics vis-a-vis, you're trying to understand the informality and the Adivasi urbanism. That was really interesting, Adivasi urbanism and the informality, and the the governance institutions and the setup, and then how they are negotiating their the space. But however, informational politics, actually, I think you need to really see whether it is contextual, whether it is relevant as far as Indian urbanization or the context of the corridors which you are looking. I think maybe few aspects or the few factors you can take, but not the overlapping or overwhelming the informational politics, because in a very broader sense, maybe in developing countries context, maybe it is relevant. I'm not able to really understand this informational politics thing, and it is a little bit diverting our attention to what exactly you're trying to look into your into your study. So these are the two observations.
Yeah, I think there were lots of questions in there. So I'll ask Sonalini to hang on a little bit and just take these two sets first. Ashma, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to both Abhinav and of course Dr. Smita for your questions. And Dr. Smita, let me address your question first. First of all, congratulations on your recent paper on VIP urbanism.
Yes.
I've been following your work with a lot of interest, and
Yeah,
your
thank
book,
you.
of course, volume on entrepreneurial urbanism, really was very inspirational, and we've been sort of looking at it. I've been looking at it with a lot of interest recently. So I think your question is very apropos, and I am very much taking a meta approach to the set of questions, which is I'm saying, how do we know what we know?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's so that's really where I think perhaps it is at a very much at an angle to a lot of the work that is also presented in the book. I should point out that in the book we talk very briefly, we touch upon the methodological issues, because
Yes.
you can't run a randomized control trial to understand what will happen over the long term in an urban development project such as this. And so my question is, how do we know what we know? And what kinds of information are held when there is a multiplicity of different kinds of agencies that are involved in administering different kinds of populations, right? And this is really at the heart of the question that I'm asking.
Yes.
And the question of information politics, like I said, I've taken from previous work done with Dr. Kennedy and others. It's really, the application here is to try to understand, particularly in a setting where you have essentially a privatized government, and you don't have, in quite the same way that you would have, the right to information applicable. And, there is a sense in which individual actors within the official apparatus have incentives to obscure information, not to document certain kinds of information that might be politically inconvenient, and also potentially, obscure, but then also, sort of in a way, keep the record clean in a particular way. What then are the challenges for us as researchers? And this is sort of part of a larger project. I've been working on this through many years now, since, doing field work since 2016 in this area. And there are a number of different papers. What I'm presenting here is very much coming at it from at a slant and looking at, the question of how do we know when information is in particular ways politicized, right? And that is the idea of information politics. So
I was like thinking on in terms of, how contested is this informational politics? No, is by itself, the contestation with respect to, the informational politics, as you said, how much is, withheld, and then how much is, and what is a segment which is able to the access, and then what is a segment which is completely not able to access, that kind of contestation also you can bring in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smita, because in fact, this is really the direction where I think we have to move. In the current scenario, I think, of course, social science in India, right? I think
Yes,
as
yes,
social scientists, we encounter so much suspicion, right? I mean,
exactly.
you are trying to sort of dig out our secrets, right? And
Yes.
so this is really where this paper is sort of situating itself to say, when we
Yes.
want to understand the long-term evolution of a site, which is very rich and can give us a really deep understanding and also inform future planning practice, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, where information is highly politicized,
Yes.
and of course, there are interests at play, then how do we sort of uncover that? And you're
Yes.
absolutely right. These are some of the directions that I would like to
See,
take.
there are two ways of looking at this informational politics, Ashima. One is as a conceptual understanding of this informational politics, and also at the empirical level, what are the contestation which you observe and then which you define. So these two things you can just bring in as a concept and then empirical contestation.
Absolutely, not to
Yes.
take up too much time. I can actually
Yes,
give a couple
no
of
problem.
examples, and I hope we can continue the conversation
Yes,
of
yes.
this channel. And
Yeah.
I'll give you examples, empirical examples of how this actually plays
Yes,
out.
no problem. No problem.
If I may, Mukta, should I go ahead and answer Abhinav's question?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think after you, then Lorraine can come in.
Yeah, sure. So, Abhinav, you're so right. I mean, particularly in the context of Jharkhand, the idea of the peri-urban becomes, I think, really fascinating because, of course, because of the, Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act. What we have is a very particular, and this is, of course, a fifth schedule state. So there's like sort of land is very contested. And one of the things that I think emerges here is that, there are exceptions created to these kinds of legal frameworks through declaring land as industrial. And that then allows for various kinds of flexibility. And that's sort of the short answer. But once again, Abhinav, I'd be really eager to continue this conversation with you. And, this is ongoing work. And I do hope to return, Lorraine, just to mention, to the idea of the peri-urban in a context like Jharkhand, where, land transformations are, in fact, legally quite constrained, right? So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Lorraine, do you want to respond or should we take Sonalini? You do, right?
I just very briefly.
Yeah,
just
sure,
very
absolutely.
briefly.
Go ahead.
I very much take your point that that this little incursion into local politics it's kind of hard to see the bigger picture. It's really for lack of time. The idea was just kind of to just give some indications. But I would like to say that in Chennai, part of the it's a big project in the sense it's ambitious and it does have a lot of kind of different pieces. But one is to compare the two different sites because, the idea is that, the questions that you have is, if you have different drivers of transformation, does that translate into different spatial, patterns in terms of connectivities, in terms of fragmentation? And for instance, does it also result in different types of governance sort of arrangements? And so I think we're really trying to explore the scope that kind of comparative urban methods allows by looking at two different sites within the same city. And I referenced some very recent literature, which we're finding really useful about intra-metropolitan comparisons. So thank you for your question.
Yes.
Now, this is really fascinating because there's so much methodological sort of insight that's coming in along with everything else. So thank you, both of you, for that. Sonalini, I'd let you ask the questions and please go ahead if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Mukta. I'm a little reluctant now because I don't want to do disservice to some of the discussion which has been so fine-grained on the empirical and so on. But it's a slightly meta question, but it's part of what what kind of drives my curiosity. And I think Ashima, you said something in the beginning about before I say that, actually, I just wanted to say in the context of the discussion on whether, this is something that was shared by Rakesh, and something fascinating about, what's going on in Bihar. And then also the responses were so interesting about how there's a diversity of responses about whether rural areas that, so basically there's no one, unilinear push towards inclusion in the urban. And that's been my experience as well, working in Delhi and NCR, and I look at the post-independence period, but I think I've been in touch with some, younger scholars who are looking at what's happening right now. And even now, even after the 72nd and 73rd amendments, and some of Delhi's villages being forcibly included into the urban limits, they're still fighting, 30 years later, they're still fighting for the restoration of certain land rights that can only be defined as or classified as rural in nature. And of course, there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of public-private scramble going on, and there's all these new players and everything. But the villagers in Delhi, from what I know from my conversations with Sahil Sasidharan, for instance, who's working on Delhi's villages, the villagers are very much they're right at the center of things. They don't see themselves as, they see themselves as disempowered historically, but they don't see themselves as out of the game right now, and they are incredibly motivated to have a stake in what's going on. So that was just a small comment, but my question was about I think, Ashima, if I heard you right, you said that your methodologically and conceptually your work goes in a different direction from occupancy, urbanism, and even subaltern urbanism. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's what I heard. And I'm just, like I said, I'm a little reluctant to ask this meta question, but I'm curious about whether yours and Lorraine's field work was allowing you to, if it allows you to move away from those frames, then where are we with those ideas, with those very influential framings? Where are you moving away to, is my question. And here specifically, I was just thinking again in terms of like urban informality, which is one of the themes that I was seeing. If we all want to, I think many people working in this field are looking to move away from this idea of either a corrupt state or a standard account of a corrupt neoliberal development, even including informality. So if we don't look at, Indian urbanization as sort of partial or failed or corrupt, and if you don't want to use the corruption frame, and if you don't want to use informality as it has been used so far, or maybe we want to expand informality, we don't want to look at, auto construction or occupancy urbanism or subaltern urbanism, but we want to stay focused on the state and its possible porosity in the face of all of this change, then where are you going? I just want to know if you had a meta answer to the meta question. And sorry if I did. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonalini, for that question, because I was hoping that they would be, we'd be able to go more into this. We were constrained very much for time. First of all, I should say that I sort of being very interested in informality, and this is sort of the genesis of my project. What I've been able to give you here is just a very particular flavor of this work. And I am very much in conversation, particularly with the idea of occupancy, urbanism, and how it shapes and plays out over the long durée. So perhaps I will also be addressing a little bit of Dr. Smita's question in answering yours, Sonalini, which is to say that, one of the things I've been doing is tracing official maps, right? And this is not the work that I presented here, I presented it elsewhere. And looking at disjunctions between various official versions of the maps, right? And so it's really remarkable to see sometimes you have the census saying, giving us one account of, what are the particular boundaries of this site. And then you have, a different account which shows up, in a particular official record, right? Or in a map that is very closely held, right? And so that's sort of the kind of disjunctions that I'm really interested in tracing. And I in fact do argue that occupancy urbanism is really central to the way that these processes play out. And for example, in the case of the basti that I just showed you, right, Bikaspur, in the photograph, it is really interesting because, you don't have, in the sense of, Solly Benjamin, you don't have a local government, right? You don't have locally representative, municipal councillors, right? So these are not elected individuals, right? So how do you actually make these claims? And it plays out a little bit differently in the two sites, right? And particularly in Bikashpur, in Steel Nagar, it's actually been surprisingly quite contested. And in a way, but before I go there, and just as a actually step back from where I was, just to let you know that when I said that, the urban greenfield and our examination analysis of it in the book particularly, um, situates and focuses on the action of the state and of large scale private actors. And in that sense, it is different from, organic forms of urban industrial development, which is the notion of subaltern urbanization, the idea of occupancy, which is again subaltern actors, leading. And so in the framing of the urban greenfield that we have looked at in the book, we are situating it in a particular way as, state and sort of large scale real estate private action. But then also interested in how it then comes into engagement with these subaltern actors that are not recognized, right? And so that's the sense in which it's sort of a little bit back to the future. We are sort of saying, okay, this is where it starts, but then how does it unfold over a period of time? That's certainly what I'm very interested in. But I will also, hand it over to Lorraine, and maybe Sonalini would love to continue the conversation either if we have time here or another time. But thanks for that question. Really sort of really provocative, and clarifies a lot of what we are thinking here.
Yeah, Lorraine, before you respond, I just wanted to push that a little bit and say that, how do you decide that that's the starting point? To me, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? I mean, whether you start from the subaltern actor or you start. So, I mean, I know that it builds on work that you've already done before, and what your theoretical entry points into that is. And it might be useful, I think, Lorraine, if for people to sort of hear a bit of that, why this framing over the others, not in terms of a competitive thing, but this idea that, we know the subaltern actors are also reacting, or is it a situation where we feel that the state frames something in conjunction with large private actors and subalterns are now in a reactive mode, or as opposed to the occupancy framing where they are doing this regardless of what the policy or what the top-down landscape is. So, that's sort of, So Nalini, I would have asked this meta question if you hadn't. So I'm just jumping in to say that that's how I was thinking of this.
I was that's very similar to what I was thinking.
Go ahead, Lorraine. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify.
No, it's very good. It's very good. And I thank you both for sort of, pushing us in this direction. I think, Ashima, I think you've answered very well that, we this kind of work was going on in parallel with a lot of very, interesting subaltern urbanism, agrarian urbanism, and I think we've all, learned from each other. But I think just to ask the more pointed question about starting point, like why do you take it from that angle? Well, Greenfield evokes sort of this, tabula rasa, you have nothing and you're going to build this great, perfect kind of thing. And so we sort of, that's why we go back and say, well, city building is not new in India. It's not like this is this new thing. But what seems to have changed is that in this current moment, that it's very much sort of instrumentalized as, it's not to build a stately capital. It's not, just to have this industrial, township. It's part of that, I guess you'd say, entrepreneurialism, and it's part of that engagement with globalization. So globalization is the big kind of new piece in the puzzle. I mean, that's one short answer is, what's new about this brand new, this desire to build these new urban spaces, new gleaming cities on the horizon. Well, it's these kinds of other actors and processes. I hope that kind of speaks to that.
Thank you. No, that's useful. Yes, Ashima, go ahead.
If I may, I just want to, I'm here, Lorraine, I will speak for myself because for me, very influential has been the work of Rajesh Bhattacharya and Kalyan Sanyal. And they've, of course, spoken about this sort of very interesting cycle, right? Which is, sort of the escape from, the city and then, the bypass, right? And then sort of the encroachment and then the eviction, that cycle, right? And that is it is a Marxian analysis. And, I'm not sure I would buy into the entire framework, but I do think that I find it very illuminating. And to an extent saying that certainly in conversations with policymakers, and here we come to the empirical, they will often say, oh, it's so difficult to get parking in Delhi, or, it's just so difficult. I mean, Mumbai is such a mess, right? So let's start anew. Let's have this great new, as Lorraine was saying, this great new utopia. And then, of course, I think our project, and for all of the authors who have contributed case studies, is to figure out, what happens to these great, beautiful plans when you let them play out over a long enough period of time.
No, thank you. I think it's a great contribution. This whole question of the utopia and how it actually turns out has been circulating in urban studies for so very long, and the idea of the utopia doesn't seem to really leave the minds of not just policymakers, but all kinds of elites that you may speak to, whether they are, influential in making cities or not. So it's great to return to that question with as many angles as we can. Does anyone else? And Nalini, thank you so much. And I'm sure there's lots more to say, and we can connect offline on this. I'd like to, yes, Lorraine.
I just
before you interject, folks. There's still time before we have to close. So this is your time to get your questions in. So I'd like, we'd love to see more hands, more questions, whatever else. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Okay, well, I thought I wasn't sure if you were wrapping up or not, and I wanted to be sure and do a shout out.
We have more hands. We have more hands.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead. Lorraine, you wanted to.
Okay, yeah, I really wanted to just acknowledge, and we want to acknowledge, all the contributors to the book. I mean, their names were up on the PowerPoint, but again, this is a collective body of work, and we're just the front-facing faces, but these other folks have contributed, and some of them are here. So I would invite you to also,
absolutely. Can you tell me?
Come in if you'd like. Well, I think that Gopa is here, and I think Matthew also. I think I saw
Gopa here.
Okay, maybe
I do see Matthew though. So Matthew, I'm just sorry,
Shreya.
You're putting you on the spot here. But
and Shreya, and I think I saw Shreya's name, but I didn't.
Shreya's not here anymore. I did see her in the beginning,
yeah.
but she seems to have dropped off now. I did see her in the beginning. But Matthew, you're on the spot. If you want to say something, no compulsions, but if you do want to say something, you can unmute and speak.
Oh, nothing much to add. It was great to listen to both of you. I think the conversation regarding the competing nature around the peripheries, the competing nature of governance systems, and in some ways, my work, which looks into the electronic city industrial township authority, which is part of the volume. There also you see actually 3-4 different agencies, actively competing. That is 3 gram panchayats which used to govern that space. I mean, formally govern that space, and an industrial township association which was sort of managing that space, and the municipal corporation which wanted to incorporate that space into its boundaries. And just the way these multiple actors, competing actors with multiple levels of power that they engaged, that they had with state authorities, how it played out. And in many ways, you see in the case of electronic city, it was in many ways the industrial township, the industries associations sort of claims which won over the claims of the panchayats as well as the municipal corporation. But it's still not a fully uh, I mean, it's not a issue that's been addressed, or there's no full stop to it, because you see that, I mean, in the present new government that we have in Karnataka, there's a talk of trying to bring back electronic city into the city's jurisdiction. So what we see is how these multiple competing actors try to gain legitimacy and claims over those spaces, and how they use those competing power that they have at each point of time. And obviously there are some winners and some losers, but I guess it's not entirely clear and never fully settled. And that's the sort of sense I got from that research, which was done about 6-7 years back, but it still seems to keep coming back in many ways. And the whole conversation now that we heard, especially in the context of the intervention about Patna and the cases around Jharkhand, and also I think in the case around Delhi by one of the participants, these the question of who's able to play a role, and how it's based on their relative power in some sort of a hierarchical structure, how that influences seems to repeat itself quite a few times. Yeah, thanks.
So just before you go, Matthews, and since you're here, what's and also because in the other informality conversation on occupancy and the peripheral urbanization and all of that stuff, the role of the courts in India is clearly the big thing. What's going on with that in this conversation? Is there just a quick answer? Because in urban studies now, this whole legal angle and what the courts do in this mix seems to be really a big angle to study. Have the courts got into this? I know Electronic City is a very, very fascinating case, but just a quick word on that.
Yeah, quickly, the one of the reasons why you can have these spaces is because under the 74 there is an exception which was actually added right in the end of when the amendment was passed. Initial drafts of the amendment did not have this industrial township exception. So this industrial township exception was added right in the end, which more or less legalizes these sort of private or semi-private forms of governance to come in. And there was one major case that actually challenged the Electronic City case, and many of the other cases I've not seen it going up to the level of courts. There's one major case called the Saj Gram Panchayat, town panchayat versus the state. There, the court, the panchayat actually challenged the authority of the state to create an industrial township, and the court considered it and said that no, there is an exception; it can be done. So the court is basically, in this one case, which is the only case I could really find, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, which basically said no, you can actually create these spaces. It's part of the institutional arrangement that we have. So in many ways, it depends upon where you are coming from, obviously. But the claims of exception seems to be at some level legal.
Thank you so much. Partho and Veronique, I know both of you are here. I don't know whether you're in a situation to jump in. I'm going to get you into the room in the hope that you can. Partho, can you speak? I mean, I don't know where you are and whether you can participate, but Matthew's intervention really sort of reminded me of the comparison with China. And if you have something to say on that, or if anyone else has something to say on that, Lorraine, Ashima, I don't want to hijack your conversation, but just seemed like an interesting point to get some more people in. Yeah,
I can, but if there are other people with waiting,
no, there's no one with hands raised or with any who's making nobody's making a claim on this space, so I'm calling people in.
Okay, so one of the big stories that one sort of I'm curious about as to how this stuff works is are these kinds of conflicts that Lorraine and Ashima are documenting, are they just sort of in the long durée of urbanization, just momentary episodes, when power shifts from one group to the other? Or are there sort of longer term consequences, right? And those consequences can be of many types. And so one of the common consequences that you see in both China and India is this whole notion of the urban village as part of the way in which expansion and claims are mediated and incorporated. And the urban village then goes on to play a particularly interesting role in the evolution of the metropolis, because it provides a kind of space that is very different from other spaces in the city in that sense, right? So I'm just curious about how Lorraine and Ashima thinking beyond this particular moment, and whether they sort of see this. The thread that I understood is that Greenfield is not Greenfield, and that's important. But in a sense that because there was a history, will there be therefore a future? Is the question that sort of one is sort of intrigued by. And the second story, sort of, which is provoked by Lorraine's comment on comparisons, is I'm just curious about this whole. I think it was a commentator, Rajesh, who was speaking about people wanting to become urban, and obviously in some places they do, and some places they don't. And I'm just curious whether across these various cases that have come up. Is it the case that a place like Chennai, for example, the periphery of Chennai, is a place where people have a fair degree of experiential knowledge of urbanization and its benefits and its cost and land values, all of that stuff, whatever you want to call it. Another place in the peripheries of Ranchi, perhaps less so. And I'm just wondering whether these differential information bases of the locals affect their preferences in any way. And is that something that was, as Lorena Shrimas looked through the other contributors of the book, is there something that jumps out that might help us think through that question? Thanks.
Thanks, Partho. In the interest of time, Kapil, if you want to ask your question, and then we'll take the last set of responses from Lorraine and Ashima. Go ahead. Kapil, we can't hear you right now. That's okay. Why don't you type your question out? I can read it. Veronique, are you here? Do you want to say something? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. We can also just...
Now, apart from hi to everybody, because I just landed a few hours ago, so I'm not very fresh.
That's okay. That's okay. Nice to see you here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting the in Delhi. Bye.
All right, great.
Welcome, Veronique.
Okay. Kapil, if you can type your question in, I can ask, but maybe we can just take a last set of responses from Ashima and Lorraine, and then close. In the meanwhile, if you type in your question, I'll ask it. Over to both of you, whichever way you'd prefer to do it. Ashima, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, Partho, thank you so much for that question, and hello, Veronique, as well. I'll take your first question, Partho, and maybe, I think the second one was addressed a little bit more to Lorraine, and so I'll, let her answer that. So, Partho, I don't really see this in short, I don't see this as episodic, and actually the Steel Nagar case particularly, and I'm using pseudonyms, trying to use pseudonyms here, is very, I think, very illuminating, because it allows us to see, we know, of course, and a lot of the case studies in the book document the kinds of struggles around land that are happening. Now, what happens, 50 years from the time that the land is taken over? And one of the things that certainly in Steel Nagar came up over and over again in the interviews is that there is tremendous akrosh, there's resentment, right? And it doesn't ever go away. And it really shapes what is possible in these sites, right? So it's not really episodic at all. I mean, people have long memories, right? And there are, of course, structural reasons why it has played out in different places. In the steel towns, I think the steel towns are a very, very rich, I think, repository. And of course, there's some really terrific work. There's Andrew Sanchez, region of Jamshedpur, Jonathan Parry, Bhilai Durg, over like the long, sort of 30 years or more. And Christian Strumpel, who's looked at Rourkela. So I think these are very interesting archives for us to look at. But to answer your question, at least from my assessment of how it works out, that a lot of these, the social spatial sort of tensions don't really quite go away, and they really, in very deep ways, shape what is possible, right? I mean, certain kinds of growth initiatives, right? New kinds of area-based development by the this private government are really don't have local purchase, right? So then it's you either do brute force or you let go, right? So that's sort of the short answer, but lots to say. Happy to take this up, and over to you, Lorraine.
Lorraine, you have literally the last word.
in 20
Except
seconds.
the thank yous. No, go ahead. You have a minute or
no,
so.
listen, hello to Partho and to Veronique. Thank you, Partho. I mean, this is, these are big questions, and I mean, I like the framing of, because there's a history doesn't mean there'll be a future. I think these panchayats, which, we're sort of trying to see really panchayats on the edge. So they're not very integrated into the urban fabric. I mean, in some ways, of course, but then you point out very rightfully that these attitudes are shaped by the bigger context, and we know that Tamil Nadu, being a very urbanized state, and where there's a lot of mobility, people move around, men and women move around a lot, and for work, but not only for work. And that this has been the case for decades. And I think, I'd like to sort of reference Vijay Bhaskar's, terrific work in the SEZ project that you know very well, is where he showed this, I mean, I wouldn't say resignation. I'd say an openness to this change, to the possibilities that this change might bring benefits. There wasn't the singular kind of we don't want to sell our land, and we don't want to diversify our activities. That's already the case. And these areas, when I talk to people who have sold their land, sometimes 20 years ago, there's hardly any more agriculture in most of these villages, but they point out it wasn't a very fertile place anyway, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of regret about moving out of agriculture, because already in Tamil Nadu, many places have adopted sort of urban activities and lifestyles, at least to an extent. Anyway, that's a lot of words to say that I do think that if we're talking about these kind of, processes of, playing out in a place like Chennai in Tamil Nadu, and if we're talking about, Patna, or even maybe some of the outskirts of Delhi, this will be a very different story. And, that's not really incredibly, original, but I do think that's an important thing to underscore. So.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. I will now have to close. I'm sure if I let this go on, people will come up with more questions, and that's always actually the hallmark of a good workshop and a good talk. So, thank you so much, Lorraine and Ashma, for making time, and thank you everyone who's stuck around with us throughout this exciting discussion. And I guess we should look for more answers in the book and all the chapters that would probably provide a lot of rich detail to today's discussion. Thank you, and see you all next month at the end of November. You'll please watch out for our emailer, which you'll get in your inboxes. And if you haven't signed up for the emailers, you should do that on the CPR website right away. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.